Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I rise to give notice of my intent to raise a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows. Resolution, expressing the sense of the House of Representatives that the President shall immediately release his tax return information to the Congress and the American people.
House will be in order. Gentleman deserves to be heard. Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know it's new to some people, but I hope they pay attention. Whereas in the United States system of checks and balances, Congress has a response.
Gentleman will suspend. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, please be in order. Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas the United States system of checks and balances, the Congress has a responsibility to hold the executive branch of government to a fair and equal standard of transparency, ensuring the public interest is placed first. Whereas, according to the Tax History Project, every president since Gerald Ford has disclosed their tax return information to the public. Whereas tax returns provide an important baseline of reasonable information, including whether the president paid taxes, ownership interest, charitable donations made, and whether tax deductions have been exploited. Whereas the disclosure of the president's tax returns could help those investigating the Russian influence in the 2016 election understand the president's financial ties to the Russian Federation and the Russian citizens. Including debts owed, and whether he shares any partnership interest, equity interest, joint ventures, or licensing agreements with Russia or Russians. Whereas the President recently fired Federal Bureau of Investigation Director James Comey, under whose leadership the FBI was investigating whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia to influence the 2016 election. Whereas President Trump reportedly stated to Russian officials during a White House meeting that he fired Director Comey to ease pressure on the ongoing investigation of Russia's influence in the 2016 election. Whereas Senate Russia investigators have requested information from the Treasury Department's Criminal Investigation Division, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, which handles cases of money laundering, for information related to President Trump, his top officials, and campaign aides, FinCEN has been investigating allegations of foreign money laundering through purchases of U.S. real estate. Whereas the President's tax returns would show us whether his foreign bank accounts and how much profit he receives from his ownership in myriad partnerships. Whereas Donald Trump Jr. said the Trump Organization saw money pouring in from Russia, and that the Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section, a lot of our assets.
Gentleman will suspend. The chair admonishes both sides of the aisle to be in order. If you have to have conversation, just simply take it outside. Gentleman may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas Congress gave itself the authority to review an individual's tax returns, to investigate and reveal possible conflicts of interest of executive branch officials involved dating back to the Teapot Dome scandal. Whereas it has been reported that federal prosecutors have issued grand jury subpoenas to associates of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn seeking business records as part of the ongoing probe into Russian involvement in the 2016 elections. Whereas, according to the 2016 candidate filing with the Federal Election Commission, the President has 564 financial positions in companies located in the United States and around the world. Whereas, against the advice of ethics attorneys and the Office of Government Ethics, the President has refused to divest his ownership stake in his businesses and can still, to this day, withdraw funds at any time from the trust of which he is the sole beneficiary. Whereas, the Emoluments Clause was included in the United States Constitution for the express purpose of preventing federal officials from accepting any present, emolument, office, or title from any king, prince, or foreign state. Whereas the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the Joint Committee on Taxation, and the Senate Finance Committee have the authority to request the President's tax returns under Section 6103 of the Tax Code. Whereas the Joint Committee on Taxation reviewed the tax returns of President Richard M. Nixon in 1974 and made the information public. Whereas the Ways and Means Committee used IRC 6103 in 2014 to make public the confidential tax information of 51 taxpayers. Whereas Director Comey has testified that tax returns are a common tool in investigations because they can show income and motives. Whereas the American people have the right to know whether or not their president is operating under conflicts of interest related to international affairs, tax reform, government contracts, or otherwise. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the House of Representatives shall immediately request the tax return information of Donald J. Trump for tax years 2006 to 2015 for review in closed executive session by the Committee on Ways and Means as provided under Section 6103 of the Internal Revenue Code, and vote to report the information therein to the full House of Representatives. And 2, support transparency in government and the long-standing tradition of presidents and presidential candidates disclosing their tax information.
Under